You know, after 4 decades on this bench, I believed I had witnessed every kind of pain, every hardship that could come through my courtroom doors. But on that cold Tuesday morning in March, a woman entered carrying a weight so heavy, so unimaginably cruel, that it broke something inside me. What she told me about where she had been just 24 hours earlier, about what happened at the very moment she should have been grieving. I still tear up thinking about it. When I heard the full story, when I understood what fate had dealt this poor soul, I had to make a decision that went beyond the law. Let me tell you exactly what happened that day. This is a story about compassion, about humanity, and about what we owe each other when life delivers its harshest blows. But before I share it all, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. What I'm about to tell you needs to be heard. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single word. I've been a municipal court judge in Providence, Rhode Island since 1985. That's 40 years of seeing people on their worst days. 40 years of hearing stories that could break your heart or restore your faith in humanity. Every morning I wake up at 5:30. I brew my coffee strong and black, no sugar, just as my father taught me when I was a girl. He came to this country from Italy with only $8 in his pocket and a dream that his children would have opportunities he never did. He worked construction his entire life and taught me something I've never forgotten. When you have power over people, that's when your character is tested. Use it wisely. Use it with mercy. I arrive at the courthouse every morning at 8:15 sharp. My clerk, Christina, has worked with me for 23 years and knows my routine better than I do. She lays out my case files neatly on my desk. She understands I need those first quiet minutes with my coffee to steady myself before putting on the robe. She can tell my mood just by the way I walk through the door. That Tuesday, March 14th, I remember feeling the cold seep into my bones as I walked in. It was one of those bitter New England mornings when the wind off the water cuts straight through you. Christina looked up and said, "Good morning," but she had that expression that told me we had difficult cases ahead. I asked what was on the docket, and she handed me the files. Mostly traffic violations and a few parking disputes, nothing unusual. But then she said something I remember clearly. "Judge, there's one case this morning. The woman just lost her husband. Yesterday was the funeral." My chest tightened. I asked what she had been cited for, and Christina told me it was a parking violation. I thought to myself, this woman buried her husband yesterday, and today she's in court over a parking ticket. I sat at my desk and reviewed the file. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. The citation had been issued the day after her husband's funeral, the very next day. I felt anger rising, not toward her, but at the cruel timing of it all. In her darkest hour, she had to worry about a parking ticket and a court date. I made a note on her file. I wanted to hear her story directly. I wanted to look into her eyes and let her know that the law leaves room for compassion, that justice is not only about rules, it's about understanding the person standing before you. At 9 o'clock, I entered the courtroom. It's not grand like the ones on television with high ceilings and marble columns. It's modest and practical, with wooden benches where people wait for their cases to be called. The American flag stands to my right, the state flag to my left. I've presided over thousands of cases in that room. I've seen people at their lowest and at their most unexpectedly noble. I've witnessed arrogance and humility, deception and raw honesty. I've learned that everyone who walks through that door has a story, and that story matters. That morning, about 20 people sat in the gallery. Some looked nervous, others irritated, others resigned. My eyes scanned the room until they settled on a woman in the third row. She was alone, dressed in a simple black dress with a cardigan thrown on carelessly. Her hands were folded in her lap, trembling slightly. Her face was pale, dark circles under her eyes revealing sleepless nights and endless tears. I knew immediately she was Sarah Mitchell. I began calling cases. I handled a dispute between two neighbors arguing over a parking line. I addressed a speeding ticket for a young man who insisted he was only 5 miles over the limit. I listened to explanations and excuses, some sincere, some less so. All the while, I kept glancing at Sarah Mitchell, sitting so still and alone as if holding herself together through sheer determination. At 10:45, Christina called her case. She looked up at me, and in her eyes, I saw a depth of pain I will never forget. These were not the eyes of someone worried about a fine. They were the eyes of someone who had lost everything. I glanced down at the citation before me. Mrs. Mitchell, I see you were cited for parking in a restricted zone on March 13th. Is that correct? I asked gently. Is that correct? I asked gently. I wanted her to hear in my voice that I was not there to make her day harder. She nodded. Yes, Your Honor. She said so softly I could barely hear her. I asked her to explain what happened, and what she told me next will stay with me forever. She took a breath, struggling to steady herself. She took a breath, struggling. Your Honor, March 12th was my husband's funeral. We were married for 32 years. He had cancer. It took him in 6 months. Her voice broke on that last word, and tears streamed down her face. She didn't wipe them away. She simply stood there and let them fall. My own throat tightened. I have heard thousands of stories in that courtroom, but a widow's grief cuts through every defense you build as a judge. She continued, each word clearly an effort. The funeral was at St. Mary's Church. My son drove in from Boston. My daughter came from Connecticut with her 2 children. We buried Michael at Swan Point Cemetery, the place where we used to walk on Sunday afternoons when things were good, when he was healthy. She paused and closed her eyes. I gave her time. In my courtroom, people are given the time they need to speak their truth. After the burial, she went on, everyone came back to our house. My house, I can't call it our house anymore, can I? She looked at me with such confusion and loss that my heart ached. People brought food. They shared stories about Michael. They meant well, but all I wanted was for everyone to leave so I could be alone with my grief. By evening, they were gone. My children wanted to stay, but I told them I needed to be alone. I leaned forward, listening carefully. Mrs. Mitchell, I am so sorry for your loss. Please take your time. She nodded and dabbed her eyes with a tissue from her purse. That night, she said, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stay in our bedroom. Everything reminded me of him. His reading glasses on the nightstand, his robe hanging on the back of the door. I couldn't breathe in there. So at 2 in the morning, I got in my car and drove. I understood that immediately. I have been married for 48 years. I cannot imagine losing my spouse. I cannot imagine that kind of emptiness. I motioned for her to continue. I drove to the places we used to go together, she said. Past the restaurant where he proposed 40 years ago, past the hospital where our children were born, past the park where we took them when they were small. And then I went to the cemetery. She paused, taking a shaky breath. I parked outside the gates. They were closed. It was 3:30 in the morning, but I could see where we had buried him just hours before. I could see the fresh earth. I sat in my car and talked to him. I told him I didn't know how to do this without him. I told him I was scared. I apologized for every argument, for every time I was impatient or unkind. I told him I loved him. The courtroom was completely silent. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Somewhere in the back row, someone sniffled quietly. I don't know how long I sat there, Mrs. Mitchell said. Maybe an hour, maybe 2. I lost track of time. When I looked up, the sun was rising, and I saw a parking enforcement officer writing me a ticket. I was parked in what I suppose is a restricted zone outside the cemetery gates. I got out and tried to explain. I told him I had just buried my husband. I said I wasn't thinking clearly, but he told me he had to issue the ticket. He said he was sorry, but rules are rules. I felt anger rise in my chest. Anger not at Mrs. Mitchell, but at a system that could be so rigid in the face of human suffering. I looked again at the citation. The officer's signature was there. The timestamp read 5:37 a.m. on March 13th, less than 12 hours after she had laid her husband to rest. I looked back at her. Mom, let me be sure I understand. You buried your husband on March 12th. That night, overwhelmed with grief, you drove to the cemetery in the early morning hours to be near him. And while you were sitting in your car, mourning and trying to find a way forward, you were issued a parking ticket. She nodded. Yes, Your Honor, she whispered. The fine is $75. I know that's not much, but with funeral expenses and the medical bills we're still paying, it feels like a mountain. I leaned back in my chair and took a moment. I have overseen thousands of cases, and I have seen people attempt to manipulate the system, lie to escape responsibility, invent elaborate excuses. But I have also seen real hardship, people facing circumstances that would break most of us. I have learned that my role is not simply to apply the law mechanically. It is to deliver justice with wisdom and mercy. Now let me pause for a moment and ask you something. Have you ever experienced a loss so overwhelming that you couldn't think clearly? Have you ever been in a place where grief consumes you and all you want is to feel close to the person you lost? Leave a comment. I truly read them. And if this story is moving you the way it moved me, press the like button. I looked at Mrs. Mitchell standing there, small and fragile, before the bench. I thought about my father's funeral 20 years ago. I remembered standing at his gravesite long after everyone had gone, unable to walk away because leaving meant accepting he was truly gone. I remembered my spouse finding me there hours later, still in the cold, unable to move. I knew exactly what she was feeling. In that moment, I made my decision. I lifted my gavel but did not strike it yet. In Mrs. Mitchell, I said, listen to me carefully. You did nothing wrong. Nothing. You were a grieving widow searching for comfort in the only way you knew how. You were trying to feel close to your husband one more time. That is not a crime. It does not a crime. It does not deserve punishment. It is human. It is what love looks like when it has nowhere else to go. I saw her eyes widen slightly. For the first time since she entered the courtroom, I saw a flicker of hope. This citation is dismissed, I continued. You owe nothing. Not $75 and not 75 cents, not a single penny. You have paid enough. You have endured enough. This court will not add to your burden. I brought the gavel down sharply, the sound echoing through the silent room. For a moment, she stood there as if unsure she had heard me correctly. Then her shoulders began to shake. The quiet tears turned into deep, aching sobs rising from the center of her grief. But these tears were different. They were not only sorrow, they were relief, gratitude, the feeling of being seen and understood when she likely felt completely alone. Christina stepped forward with a box of tissues. Mrs. Mitchell took several and pressed them to her face. I waited. Over the years, I've learned that sometimes people need a moment to release everything, especially in a place where they expected judgment instead of compassion. When she finally looked up, she said something I will never forget. A thank you, Your Honor. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for seeing me as a person and not just a case number. I nodded. Mrs. Mitchell, you are not a case number. You are a woman who loved her husband for 32 years and lost him too soon. You are a mother and grandmother doing your best to hold yourself together when everything feels like it's falling apart. That's who you are. I paused to make sure she heard me, and I want you to know something else. Your husband would be proud of you for coming here today, for facing this when all you probably wanted to do was stay in bed and shut out the world. That takes courage. You honor his memory with that courage. She gave a small, broken smile through her tears, but there was a faint light in it. He always said I was stronger than I knew, she whispered. He was right, I replied. Now go home. Take care of yourself. Lean on your children and grandchildren. Give yourself all the time you need to grieve and to heal. This matter is finished. She thanked me several more times before turning and walking down the aisle. As she passed, I noticed people in the gallery gently touch her shoulder or hand. Small gestures of comfort from strangers who had witnessed something deeply human in that courtroom. After she left, I remained seated for a moment before calling the next case. I thought about the parking enforcement officer who issued the ticket. I understood he was simply doing his job. Rules exist for a reason, but I also know that rules without compassion become tyranny. Laws without mercy become oppression. My father used to say, the letter of the law matters, but the spirit of the law matters more. The spirit is about fairness, about decency, about remembering that we are all human and that we all stumble. About 3 weeks later, I was in chambers reviewing paperwork when Christina walked in with an envelope. "A judge, this is for you," she said. I looked at the return address. It was from Sarah Mitchell. I opened it carefully and found a handwritten letter on simple stationery. The writing was slightly shaky but clear. I want to share part of what she wrote because it meant more to me than almost anything I've received in my career. Dear Judge Judy, I hope you don't mind me writing to you. I wanted you to know what your kindness meant to me. The morning I came into your courtroom, I truly didn't know how I would keep going. I was drowning in grief and overwhelmed by everything I suddenly had to manage alone. When the officer gave me a parking ticket while I was sitting at my husband's grave, it felt like the universe was telling me my pain didn't matter, that even though my world had ended, I still had to follow every rule. I came to court expecting more of the same, more cold bureaucracy. More cold bureaucracy. More being treated like a number. But you saw me. You really saw me. You understood. And when you dismissed that ticket, it wasn't about the $75. It was about someone in authority telling me I wasn't crazy. I wasn't wrong. My grief mattered. You gave me permission to be human in my darkest hour. I will never forget that. I had to stop reading for a moment. I removed my glasses and wiped my eyes. I'm not ashamed to say I cried reading that letter. After 40 years on the bench, you might think I'd have developed thicker skin, but I haven't. And I don't ever want thicker skin if it means losing the ability to feel the weight and the privilege of this work. About 6 months after dismissing Mrs. Mitchell's ticket, I was grocery shopping on a Saturday morning. I was in the produce aisle trying to decide which avocados were ripe when I heard someone say, "A Judge Judy." I turned and saw Sarah Mitchell standing there with her cart. She looked different from the woman who had stood in my courtroom. The sadness was still in her eyes, the kind that never completely fades after losing someone you love. But she seemed lighter, as though she had learned how to carry the burden. I smiled and greeted her. She stepped forward and took my hand. "Wanted to thank you again," she said. "Not just for dismissing the ticket, but for treating me like I mattered. I've thought about that day so many times. Your kindness helped me more than you know." I told her I had simply done my job the way it should be done. She shook her head. "I know," she said, she said, "You did it the way it should be done. Most people just do their job. There's a difference." We talked for a few minutes in the produce section. She told me her daughter had welcomed another baby, her third grandchild. She had returned to work part-time as a librarian. She had also begun volunteering with a grief support group, helping others walking the same path she had walked. "I figured if I could help someone the way you helped me," she said, "maybe some good could come from all that pain." My eyes filled with tears right there beside the avocados. The woman who had once stood before me, barely able to speak, was now using her pain to lift others. That is the resilience of the human spirit. That is what happens when people are treated with dignity and compassion instead of cold procedure. Before we parted, she said something I will never forget. "A Judge, you gave me back my faith that day. Faith that the world isn't entirely cruel. Faith that there are still people who care. Faith that I could survive this. Thank you for that gift." I hugged her there in the store, something I rarely do, but it felt right. When we stepped back, we were both a little teary, and I didn't mind who noticed. Let me ask you a favor. If this story speaks to you, if you believe compassion belongs in our legal system, share it. Send it to someone in law enforcement or the courts. Send it to someone grieving. Remind someone that good people are still trying to do what's right. Subscribe so you don't miss the other stories I'll share. And tell me, do you think I made the right decision? Would you have done the same? About a year after dismissing the ticket, I was honored by the Bar Association for my years of service. It was a lovely ceremony with kind words and a plaque for my office. During the reception, a woman approached me. At first, I didn't recognize her. Then I realized it was Sarah Mitchell. She wore a beautiful blue dress, her cheeks full of color. She looked like someone who had found her way back to living. She told me she had read about the ceremony in the newspaper and wanted to thank me again in person. But she also had news. "A Judge," she said, "I started a scholarship fund in my husband's name. It's for people facing financial hardship because of medical bills or funeral expenses. We raised enough this year to give 3 scholarships to families who need help paying their bills and getting back on their feet. And I want you to know you inspired it." The kindness you showed me, I wanted to pass it on. I wanted to multiply it. I was speechless. She had taken the compassion she received and turned it into something that would help countless others. She transformed her pain into purpose. She magnified mercy. That is the power of compassion. It doesn't only help the person in front of you. It creates ripples far beyond what you can see or measure. I hugged her again and told her how proud I was. how proud her husband would be, how beautifully she was honoring his memory. She smiled and said, "I learned from the best. I don't consider myself the best, not even close, but I am grateful that a choice I made on one ordinary Tuesday morning created something so meaningful. That scholarship fund is still active 5 years later. It has helped dozens of families overwhelmed by medical debt or funeral costs. It has kept people in their homes. It has helped parents continue providing for their children. It has prevented financial disaster for those barely holding on. And it began because I chose compassion over bureaucracy in my courtroom one day. That's why I say small decisions matter. Whether you're a judge, teacher, police officer, parent, employer, or friend, you hold power in someone's life. You can brighten their day or darken it. You can see them or overlook them. You can extend compassion or withhold it. Choose carefully. Choose wisely. Choose with your heart as well as your mind, because those choices ripple outward in ways you may never fully witness. They shape lives. They alter paths. They teach lessons. They help create the world we all share. If this story meant something to you, if you believe in justice guided by mercy as I do, press like and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs the reminder. Watch the next story from my courtroom. I promise it will stay with you. I have served on this bench for 40 years because I believe something simple. We are all equal before the law. Every one of us, rich or poor, powerful or powerless. And the law should be applied with wisdom, discretion, and compassion, because we are not merely enforcing rules. We are delivering justice. And justice without mercy is not truly justice. It is only punishment. And punishment alone has never healed anyone or improved the world. Thank you for listening. God bless you. Take care of one another. Show kindness whenever you can.